Once again, welcome to Sunday Morning Sitting Group. My name is Trudy, and I'm the founding teacher here at InsightLA. And Akemi is our volunteer coordinator, who is the co-moderator with Kenny this morning. I hear, Kenny, you're going to be moderating during our dialogue. And both of our directors are here right now. Mark Coburg could wave at everybody, and Martin Vitorino, you could wave at everybody, Martin. And I wonder how many of you may be new to InsightLA this morning, but I'm not going to scroll through the pages to look right now. I'm just going to welcome you if this is your first time here, because this feels like a kind of momentous time in our city, in our society, in our nation, in our community for sure, communities. And so I've been reflecting on what I would like to share with you this morning. And I know that there's something I would love for you to take away from today's meeting. And of course, I'll be speaking after we meditate. For those of you who are new, we're going to do a half an hour of meditation. Then I will offer some teaching, and then we have a chance for some dialogue together. But what I really would love for everybody to take away from this morning, as best we can, is to just inquire together, how can we use the teachings to do the sort of deep exploration and examination and education of ourselves first, that can help inform wise responses from each of us as we speak with our children and our families and our neighbors and our friends and our various communities during this tumultuous time. So that's the intention for today. And now I want to invite you to find your comfortable sitting posture. And I will ring the bell to begin our sit. So we're going to allow the attention to drop gently down from the head, where it's usually lodged, because we usually have the impression that we're looking out at the world from our head through our eyes. So gently closing the eyes or lowering your gaze. Whatever you're comfortable doing. And this way, we let all of our body, mind, and heart know that we're looking within. Just for now, as we meditate. We're shifting the focus of our awareness from going out to the world around us and just locating their consciousness within. With a special focus on the body and the sensations in the body as we sit here together. And just letting that attention drop from the head into the heart, Taking a deep breath in and releasing. And one more time, a breath in and releasing. So we're breathing in the aliveness of this moment and releasing tension from our bodies, our minds, our hearts with the out breath, this calming breath, the breath that helps us settle down, calm down, and be grounded in the simplicity of this body, this moment. This particular breath, this moment in our life and the life of all worlds. Receiving this life, receiving this breath, receiving the sounds of life around you. Receiving all the activity of thoughts and emotions, just letting them flow through, move through you as we sit still together. And when the mind wanders away into the past or the future, just shift your body back half an inch or an inch. Just reining the attention in to this moment, stepping back into that posture of receptivity, poise, dignity, and balance. And please make sure, if it isn't, that your sound. We step back into being present. And in this shared presence, grounding the awareness in the body and in the tenderness and vulnerability of simply sitting in this great openness of heart and mind. This is from the poet Bridget Lowry. She says, in the strange early morning half light, we sit. In the cloudiness of our questioning, we sit. In our madness and our clarity, we sit. In the midst of too much to do and too much to feel, we sit. In the warm arms of our shared sorrow, we sit. In community and in loneliness, we sit. In sweet exhaustion, we sit. In the blazing energy of being alive, we sit. Here with each lively sound of the birds, here with the rippling of breezes and the dry grasses, here with the sound of the plain, with the cobwebs and the clouds, here with the sadness of what's happening in our country upon us. Us in the world and the world in us. So, welcome everybody again. And uh, as I said earlier, what I really hope that all of us can take away from this morning is this question of how do we use the teachings that we study and practice here at InsightLA and other places where you may practice. How can we use these teachings to help us inquire, to look more deeply at what's happening within our own hearts and around us, so that we can have wiser responses to wiser responses when we speak or act in the situation that we find ourselves in. And the situation that I'm referring to is the unrest, the fires, the anger, the terror that has been filling our communities. And I am not in Los Angeles right now. I'm still up at Jack's, and I so wish I was home there with all of you. My daughter was like, "Mom, do you think you want to come back?" We are planning to come back toward the end of the week. I just feel that wish to be physically there, but I certainly am there in spirit with everybody. And I'm there as a mom. Simply unbearable. Everybody found it just viscerally unbearable to watch the videotape of George Floyd being killed. But as a mom, when I heard that he had called out for his mama uh, in I guess the last couple minutes of his life, and his mother had died 2 years earlier, but there's just such a deep, deep uh, sense of protection that can come from one's mom, whether she's that great of a mom in general or not. And I was reading a beautiful opinion piece in CNN by Christy Oglesby, who's a senior producer there. And she said, "Mama is the sweetest name in the world." And she talks at length about raising her son, Drew, and how he's now a young man. And she says, after the years of protecting him, now he thinks about protecting me. He says, "Haven't I told you I can lift things? I can pump the gas?" She said, "But I'm still and will always be mama. That's my job." So watching that video of George Floyd when he couldn't breathe and calls out for help, uh, it's unbearable. It's unbearable to any mother. It's unbearable to anyone who really could stay with it and watch it. And she said, "I'm tired. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of reading about Ahmaud, Travis, George, and so many others. The list never stops." And this is the part that I really resonated with. She said, "I need white mamas to share this burden. I need my white friends to love me and mine enough to come running." You know, it's something that we need to look at from every perspective. uh, Spiritual, also the perspective of our health. You know, years ago, I was talking about the discovery of Elizabeth Blackburn, who got a Nobel Prize for this discovery, and her work with Elissa Epel on the telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes, the little caps that end our chromosomes, like the cap on the end of a shoelace, and telomerase, the enzyme that they produce that affects our longevity. The length of our telomeres actually uh, corresponds to the length of our life and how long we will live. And she says, I heard her speak the other day, and she said the worst stressors, exposure to violence, trauma, abuse, and mental illness, are shaped by a surprising factor: the level of income inequality in a place, in a region. For example, countries with the biggest gap between their richest citizens and their poorest have the worst health and the most violence. And she's not even a public health doctor, but she is a researcher. And this this research about the unhealthiness of this big gap between the rich citizens and the poorest ones, I thought this is a hopeful thing. You know, this could provide perhaps some of the richest ones with the incentive to share more and help lift up the poorest ones, because for their own health, for the length of their own telomeres. That's what I was thinking a couple years ago. But today this just feels much more urgent, and it's clear that that hasn't happened in our country. So I want to just go over a teeny bit of history. I'm not a historian. There are historians here among us who know way better than I. But this is from a scholar of American political history named Julian Zelizer, who says, you know, after cities burned in the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson set up the Kerner Commission, which documented police violence against African Americans and found that racism and police brutality were the primary causes in the surges in riots. This report, released in 1968, famously said, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal." And since then, this issue of criminal justice and racism has never gone away. And I've heard people say all kinds of things in the last day, last 24 hours, last night and day. And people have said things like, you know, we need better education for our police force. Maybe they should all go to college. And I thought, well, everybody should have the opportunity to go to college. That's great. But even if people go to college, they are not going to hear in their history classes what is the basis for what we're witnessing today. They're not, I mean, maybe if they go to a really progressive college or they have a really progressive teacher, politically, they might hear. But as the journalist L.Z. Granderson said, it's intellectually dishonest to say we will return to peace and quiet because this country has never been at peace. How can a nation born out of genocide, born out of slavery, and sustained by a system that firmly places minorities behind their white counterparts in every significant socioeconomic measurement by a considerable margin, how can such a country have peace? So when we try to understand what's happening today, we can listen to somebody like Van Jones, who's explaining, look, you know, if you don't listen to people when they speak, they're going to raise their voices. And maybe if you don't listen when they raise their voices, they're going to shout. And if you don't listen when they shout, they're going to scream. And if you don't listen when they scream, they're going to throw things. And this was how he was big, you know, he gave a talk and he was talking about Atlanta, but he's from LA and it's been happening in LA. And this is a compassionate view of the young people who are basically disrupting peaceful protests, and whether they're from our community or from the outside, as we hear, I don't know, of course, but it's a compassionate view, and it's asking us to look underneath those surface behaviors like we would with a child who's acting out, to understand. But obviously these are not all kids. And, you know, too often we dismiss people who are committing violence and we try to ignore them, or we get angry at them. Of course, who wouldn't be angry witnessing what we've been witnessing? But anger is like a second layer, and fear is a primary emotion. You know, when we're scared, When somebody frightens us badly, first we're totally scared, but then we get angry. And you can see it if, you can see it, well, as a parent, I've seen it in myself, like when a child does something scary, like they rush after a ball toward the street. And if they go into the street, you grab them and you're mad at them. Don't do that. Don't ever do that, right? Because they've scared us. They've scared us. But so behind the anger that we're witnessing is also fear. Fear that my life will never change. Fear that I have to keep witnessing and hearing about these murders. Fear that there will never be justice. Fear that as the mama of a young Black man, he might not come home. Fear that he can do everything right and still get killed. Fear for our babies, fear for our kids. So the thing is, if we don't listen to people when they're scared, they're going to get angry. And their anger can eventually, if it's still not attended to, and if nothing changes, can turn to violence. I'm not justifying violence at all. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to open my heart and understand, because that's what I've been taught to do in this practice. So instead of condemning and judging and attacking people for doing violence, which is not, it's not that we're justifying it or saying it's okay, but instead of like pouncing on it with all the force of our angry reactivity and self-righteousness, instead of doing that, I think we need first and foremost to help people feel heard, to listen to each other, to far from advocating violence, to listen, which is a very non-violent, peaceful, and peace-promoting activity. From your own experience, when someone listens to your concerns and listens to your fears, they go away. They go away. My granddaughter called me this morning, panicked because one of her good friends had gone to the demonstrations, which she did not do, and they're supposed to get together today. And now she's worried about catching the virus because her friend was, at these demonstrations. And listening to her and reassuring her that if they both wear masks and they socially distant and they stay outside, they're safe, they're okay. It calmed her down. She felt heard. Her fear went away. She is getting together with the friend. She didn't want to break their date because she had done that the day before for something else. And anyway, relationships need tending carefully. But just to come back to this question about fear and anger, when we talk about our anger, it gets bigger often. We wind ourselves up. But it's different when we talk about fear. When we talk about fear, it quiets down. It gets less and less. So the more we can actually listen to the perspectives and views of people we may disagree with, we may disagree entirely. But before we disagree, can we listen? And we can explain how we see certain behaviors as violent. But we need to listen first, because we're not going to get anywhere if we don't. And also because people's fears in this situation have been too well founded. For those of us who are old enough to remember the riots of the past and who were young adults in the 60s, it's shocking to realize how little has changed. It's really depressing that we don't have the leadership in our country to really help promote change. And, at InsightLA too, we are putting a magnifying glass on our organization. We've been doing this for a few years now to better see where any of us might be reflecting the conditioned racism of our society. And with this heartbreaking, with it so visible currently around us, this feels more important than ever. We have a white awareness training coming up, and already 81 people signed up for it, which is a beautiful sign of people realizing we need to educate ourselves. We need help to look at our stuff. It's painful to look at our stuff. But now we really can't be race neutral. We're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And the last few weeks, teachers from InsightLA have been writing the newsletters, which makes me so happy that they are, because they're stepping up to give voice to their feelings about what's been going on since the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And the Buddha was very clear about this, by the way. The Buddha said very clearly, all tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill or cause another to kill. There's so many references to this in the Buddha's teachings. Going on to say, one is not called noble who harms living beings. By not harming living beings, one is called noble. And then, of course, he called on us further to radiate love and understanding. And this is what we do with our loving kindness practice, to try to cultivate within our own hearts enough love to just radiate to the entire world. You know, and that is what the people we revere, whether it's Dr. King or Ram Dass, or the people who can radiate love to the whole world. And as I was saying, it's uncomfortable for us to look at how we may be unconsciously acting in hurtful ways or holding opinions that can be hurtful, when all we want to do, and everybody here is here because you want to wake up and alleviate suffering in your own life and in the world. That's why you're here at the sitting group. That's why you come to InsightLA. That's why we exist. So to look at the bias and preconceptions that we bring to our life, it's a hard practice, but it really is. This radical kind of inquiry is at the heart of what we are asked to do with these teachings. And let's face it, when we look into this, we may not look so good. Either we as an organization and how we deal with systemic racism. And I want to ask you to please not leave this conversation. That's what Christiana wrote 2 weeks ago. I just saw somebody get up and walk away, and I thought, you know, you may just be going to, you know, get a drink of water, but it's a metaphor. Please don't leave this conversation. We really need to be having this conversation. And if you don't think so, go walk around our city in the areas that have been burned. We need to have this conversation. And, you know, when we write in the newsletter, the ways that we have, we get feedback, and some people really appreciate it, and other people are puzzled, and they say things like, you know, I don't have privilege. This is a white person, of course, saying this. You know, I don't see that I have privilege just due to being white. I see people bending over backwards to be kind, to be courteous, not to insult a person of color, a Black, Indigenous, or person of color. No white person I know wants to be accused of being racist. So we actually walk around afraid of doing anything wrong. And on and on and on. And, you know, the point isn't for white people to feel guilty and horrible about themselves. That's not the point at all. That's called white fragility, when people go to just feeling defensive and terrible and guilty. That's not helpful, and nobody wants that. Not, you know, not Black, Indigenous, people of color, or anybody. And the people who don't see their own privilege are just as horrified by the killing and the blatant injustice that they see. But at the same time, you know, what is privilege? what does it mean? It doesn't mean that we're necessarily wealthy. It means that we teach ourselves how to be aware. Privilege is being unaware of the ways in which we benefit in this society simply by virtue of the color of our skin, if it happens to be white. And there are lots of references that can help understand the very specific ways that this unfolds in our lives, which are beyond the scope of this talk. But I don't know if Kemi, I don't know if you could post a reference to Peggy McIntosh's work. That would be great, because that was a very early work about helping people understand about privilege and how it actually manifests in our lives, that we might, I certainly wasn't aware of lots of these things when I started looking into this more deeply. And so the civil disobedience is important. The protests are important. The inquiry is important. The honesty is important. And the courage is important. The courage to see some painful things, perhaps about ourselves, perhaps about those we love, perhaps about our very own organization. Thanks, Akemi. Because while overt white supremacy is socially completely unacceptable, still, even with the leadership we currently have, unacceptable in our society, like, lynching and blackface and swastikas and neo-Nazis and making discriminatory slurs and jokes. That's all socially unacceptable. But there is a giant, I have a graphic of a pyramid. I'm going to text it to you, Akemi, so you can post it, of this pyramid that shows at the top the overt white supremacist things that are obviously completely unacceptable, excuse me. But then a huge part of the triangle shows covert white supremacy things that are socially acceptable. And so it's important for us to learn about these things if we don't know, and lots of us don't know. So hold on one second. I'm going to text this to you, Akemi, and then you can text it. You can post it on the chat. Just trying to see where I have it here.
It's the covert and overt white supremacy pyramid. Yeah, I have it.
Thank you, because I can't remember who sent it to me I can't remember who sent it to me at the beginning. So these are things that we as, that those of us who identify as white people really need to become more aware of, because all of us are horrified by the gross injustices and know they have to be stopped. And all of us, I don't think anybody would disagree that when you watch video footage of, an unarmed black man shot in the back while running away, or a man with a permit to carry a firearm telling the police officer that he has a permit and that he's going to reach for it. He gives the officer, a heads up. I'm going to reach for it. He moves slowly. He moves carefully, trying to assure the police officer, who shoots and kills him anyway. All of us are horrified by witnessing these things, but we are not all aware of the more subtle or covert things that for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, eat away at their peace of mind and heart every single day and create so much stress that they are actually medically, health-wise, more vulnerable. So, greed, hatred, and ignorance, right? The three things that poison our experience of life. This is what the Buddha taught. Greed, hatred, and ignorance. This is what we're experiencing. And the path to the end of greed, hatred, and ignorance is within each of our own hearts and within our relationships with each other. So that greed, hatred, and ignorance can be replaced with respect, listening, learning, openness of mind and heart. And we can celebrate the moments and hope they will be our future of things like that video of the sheriff. And maybe if you have this, you could post it to Akemi. That video of the sheriff walking with the marchers in Flint, Michigan. Whew, okay, this is what I want to share with you this morning. And now we have time for some conversation and dialogue, which I'm guessing will be quite lively. I hope so. And so Kenny is moderating this morning.
Good morning. If you want to just raise your virtual hand so we can see who wants to speak. And also I'd like to hear some people we have not heard from for a while, or if you're isolated, and also just be mindful of the time so we can get enough people to share. Thank you.
You know, you might do what Akemi taught us, the practice that is part of our having especially difficult conversations, but that practice of, if you usually are quiet, step up and say something. If you usually feel free to step up and say something, make a little room and see if some of the quiet ones might go.
Don't see any hands yet, so
I would say the quiet ones usually stay quiet.
just raise your physical hand.
Everybody else, feel free to jump in.
Is it Rana? Rona?
Thanks. Yeah, it's Ronak. Hey, Trudy, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I think something about implicit biases is just something that has very much come up for me as well. Once I sort of came upon it during a mindfulness class, and like things that are like I grew up with, that was just like conditioning from my parents about like, views towards other races and things like that. It's something I've been working with myself and seeing how it comes up. But I guess my question for today is like, we're taught to like focus on compassion and empathy, and I get trying to understand the violence, but then you read about businesses that are like innocent, like they're businesses run by African American people that are getting burned down, or like by immigrants, and they're kind of taking it in stride, which is really nice. Like they say like, well, we kind of understand that, and what's a business, like they're like life needs to be preserved, but it's like, but we're just coming out of a pandemic, and sometimes it feels like pain sort of triggers other people's pain, and it could be other pain that is sort of like they're not using this, but it's like, oh, now I get to express it, and so they're expressing it in these ways that seem sort of counterintuitive to like getting justice, because they're innocent people that are getting affected in the middle. And so I guess it's times like this, it's like, oh, okay, I go within to try to find the compassion and the understanding, but it's really hard because you question about like that there's so many other forces besides like compassion and empathy in the world, and sometimes it feels like these like evil strong forces are just so strong, and then it like triggers my past pain, which has nothing to do with this, but it has like some other injustice that I had in my life, and then it's like I'm trying to work with that and be like, no, this isn't about this is something totally different, and work through my own stuff. And so it's like, where do you find the line at times like this when it's so hard to go in and be like, I want to focus on compassion, empathy, forget even implicit biases at this point, because it's so hard to even go there and, and still be like, well, I still want to be a loving, kind person, but you find yourself battling that within.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, Rona. And so a few things. First of all, listening to yourself compassionately first and foremost. So if the events are triggering memories and feelings from your own trauma, then attending to that and really listening and seeing in yourself how pain and whatever trauma happened to you was certainly not fair. You know, how, what that triggers in you. And you have a practice, you have the skills to be able to work with all of that, and hopefully the support. It sounds like you have had good support. And then imagining what it's like if repeated traumas are enacted on you or your body or the bodies of, you know, people like you, and you don't have the support and you don't have the skills to handle the eruption of emotions, which are not coming from the frontal cortex, which would be logical and say, oh, but these are ma and pa businesses that belong to black and brown people. Why would we hurt them? You know, instead, it's just the sort of instinctual, frightened, angry reactivity that is in charge of the brain at that time. And I'm not even talking about people who might intentionally disrupt peaceful protests to make them look bad. So how do you become compassionate? How do you rather maintain, because you are a compassionate person, how do you maintain your compassion in the face of times when it just feels like, yes, there's forces that are not of love that are on the rise? It feels like that. How do you do that? And I think that the way that we can do that is we really are lighting a light, you know, a candle in the darkness of that with and for each other. And the people who have done that historically, whether they were interned in concentration camps in Nazi Germany or in the US during World War II, or you know, wherever people have suffered injustice. And I don't mean to make a comparison between the Holocaust and the internment of the Japanese, but I'm just talking about unjust things that countries and societies have done that make us feel like evil is on the rise or something, you know, fears like that. You know, that when we're in a time like that, this is when we really need to come together with each other as a community and support the forces that we know are here, of compassion, of love, of connection, and the values, our deepest values in our hearts. And then to join with other people who are working for justice, for social, economic, environmental, racial justice in our world. And if I've left one out, please add it in. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart. And there's no easy answer except what we're doing right here, right now.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, I was really looking forward to this because I just wanted to hear your thoughts. And
yeah, thank you.
Because when you see leaders and you see what's happening, you just kind of want to see what, I guess, yeah, the community or what resonates deeply with me is like where it stands. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have iPad 97 hand up. Whoever that is. You know who you are?
Oh, hi, I'm Kathy in Sarvia.
Hi.
I just wanted to kind of comment on the last comments because a lot.
You muted yourself somehow.
Sorry. Hi, I wanted to comment on the last speaker's comments because they're very challenging and triggering as well to kind of have this, to have to confront that kind of questioning. And there's an article, a really amazing article in the LA Times that I want to direct her and other people who feel similarly to read, and it's by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who has been pivotal in civil rights issues throughout history.
Important voice. Yep.
Important voice and a celebrity who stood up right away when this was happening. And one of the things he stresses is justice over judgment. And I think that that's a really important point to make, that these people are seeking justice and it's not our place to judge them.
Thank you.
That's it.
And I didn't mean to cut you off if you had more to say. I'm just thanking you for saying that.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of reiterated in some of the things that you're saying as well, Trudy, and I thank you for that as well.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Eads.
Hi. I'm a little nervous asking this because I don't want to also trigger people for it, but I really, when you were talking, Trudy, you kept talking about anger coming from fear, and I know that it was sort of directed towards some of the violence with the protests, but I just struggle because I understand that. I understand whether it's these white separatist groups trying to use it as an excuse, or whether it's minorities' anger. Like, I understand that anger and that on both sides. What I don't understand is, so the violence from the police, that must have come from fear as well, right? I mean, that's another violence that's coming. And I don't understand that violence and that fear, like where it wasn't, and it's easy to say, oh, well, it's just this one racist guy, but it was several police that also stood by and watched. So where does that come from? And I feel like sometimes our political system, like we immediately, even if we arrest them, then now they've got lawyers and they can't speak, and it's all becomes about punishment, which I understand, but there's no conversation. So I'm sitting here looking, and I find myself looking into the eyes of those police officers and wondering, wanting to hear, like, what is going on inside of them? Like,
Thank you.
what's the conversation that can be had between minorities and police or authority?
Well, these conversations have been going on for 50 years. So it's not that there aren't conversations. Look, this is just my opinion, okay? I've not read this, and this is just what I feel. And it sort of goes back to what I said when somebody said, well, why don't the police, why don't they go to college? And if they had a better education, they wouldn't do these things. And I said, well, because they wouldn't get the education that is actually what they need to understand what they are seeing in the communities that they patrol and police. Because what happens is, because people don't understand the roots of the societal, the dysfunction that happens in poor communities, because they don't understand the roots of economic and racial and injustice and the structural institutional racism that pervades our society and that has created the segregation residentially that we have, the fact that our schools, that we don't mix and know each other and love each other as community members and neighbors, and all of these things have created the causes and conditions for the Black communities, some brown communities, poor communities, to be places where the police feel unsafe themselves and witness things going on that actually they judge. And a lot of, I'm not saying in LA, but it has been investigated that significant number of police officers, at least in the state of Florida, which is where this information came from, actually go at night off duty on white supremacist sites. And do you see what I mean? This is being fueled. And I think that what Nicole just wrote in the chat is really correct. That there is a deep subtext of fear. You're right, Kathy, they're frightened. And everybody's frightened. And I think that when you treat people poorly, when you keep them down, you deep down know that there are going to be repercussions. And that, and the fear then comes from, and this is a huge fear of the wealthy among our governing people, that, that there will be some kind of uprising, that there will be some kind of rebellion. And I also watched the arrest, which someone is just calling attention to on the chat. I remember watching the arrest. And it's gonna make me cry to even say it. If you watch the arrest of Sandra Bland, and you can watch the whole thing on video, you can feel as his voice rises, you can feel his fear as this woman speaks to him bravely and strongly. And, some of it is misogyny too. The fact that, men don't want, many men don't want women to shout at them. Most men having had moms, don't want women to shout at them, I'm sure. And but there are so many factors that go into what you're asking about, and it's a really deep and important question. So thank you.
Is it Lenny or Lenai?
Hello, it's Lenny.
Hi.
First time here, and Trudy, thank you very much for amazing session. I'm actually a friend of Kathy who spoke earlier. They invited me this morning. Again, thank you. I just wanted to voice my own opinion about what I think one of the key issues are with policemen. And there's just a lack of respect for people, and particularly some of the communities they police. They see their community as less than. And that might be oversimplifying the issue of racism or just the discrimination, but that's what appeals or occurs to me sometimes, is that there's a lack of just basic respect for other people. And so when you see these people as less, you treat them as less, and it just continues. It's a cycle. And I think we need to really delve into that and pull these officers aside, pull the community aside, and really get to the meat of it, and not just have these for show, oh, we're running an investigation. Screw the investigation. Let's really get into it, bring everybody forward, and give a safe space to talk about it freely and get to the heart of the problem.
And a safe space to talk about it freely is just what you're saying, Lenny. It has to be a space of respect, of listening to each other respectfully. And it might involve some shouting, and it might involve a lot of emotion. It will, actually. We know this.
That's hard for the course. If people are going to get beyond their problems, sometimes there's going to be yelling and screaming and kicking and fight, but that's just part of it. It's the way it's cathartic. We can get it out in the open and work through it.
Yeah.
So, thank you for letting me have my piece.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking your piece. And, as Jane pointed out in the chat, we don't have wise leadership. We don't have really any leadership on this, except leadership that's actually making it worse.
We have scary leadership. It's not even leadership. It's beyond horrific what's going on, but that's a whole other conversation.
No, I know, but I agree. It's scary.
Thanks.
Bob Poole. Bob? Hello?
You
Sorry.
there, Bob?
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great. Hi. I want to pick up on what Leah just said. I grew up in the segregated South in the 50s and 60s. And what she said about respect is just what I was thinking. There's a culture among white people in the South, and I'm not saying, well, yeah, everybody too, because I felt it in myself, but it's more pronounced in certain people, that feels that African Americans are inferior and somewhat less human. Even I think it goes back to slavery, but it's pervasive. And I saw it. I just grew up in it. I was saturated in it. They desegregated the schools when I was a sophomore in high school. It's more than just fear in the moment, is what I guess is what I'm saying with the policeman. There's like a cultural narrative among white people, especially in certain communities, and especially in the South, which I'm sorry to say because I got plenty of family and friends there still, that sees Black people as less than human and therefore deserving of less respect. And it serves a lot of things in white people. There's a lot been written about that. But I think I guess what I'm saying is that when you have policemen in Florida or wherever else coming to a situation where they may in fact be frightened in the moment, there's also the background of that is a certain way of feeling that the people they're looking at that aren't fully human, don't deserve the level of respect that a white person would. And then that fear just, is the next ingredient, I think, that leads to the kind of violence that is so distressing. It's hard to even talk about it, honestly. I really appreciate, Trudy, you talking about this today. is so important for us to be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you for speaking up about your background. And of course, what you said, I know is true, and it's really important. And you as a psychologist, you understand, but still, it's true. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
This is Kenny. I have to chime in a bit for two reasons. One, there's forces at work behind what's going on. There was a gathering in Beverly Hills, and a woman was interviewing people. Why are you here? Why are you here? These young people don't even know why they're there. They were just listening to people on Twitter and showing up. And so there's white supremacists, all kinds of things pushing people around in this town. And it's really sad because it's a lot different than when I grew up. I grew up in the 60s. I happened to go to school with Fred Hampton at Proviso East High School with a lot of other people that came out of that high school. And, you know, there was not the social media that's driving people. And that was really sad. I mean, I'm kind of in tears in a bit because my yearbook has police in riot gear lined up at all the doors and through the hallways. And if you were caught in between classes, you were arrested. And my father happened to be president of the school board. And we had to have people guarding our house for a little while because of what was going on. And because my father was an advocate for the Black population because he was responsible for all these communities. So people have to realize, these young people have to realize that the messages that are out there are coming from forces they're not really paying attention to. We have to educate these kids. I mean, I got on a committee for peace at that time to try to keep the hostilities down at our high school because they were breaking up every day and every buses. I mean, it was awful.
Thank you, Kenny.
Oh, but anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to point to Jane Davis's vote. Just want to remind everybody, yeah, vote. So let's sit together. Let's just sit together for a minute or two.
We can do it after.
And I'm sorry. Oh, wait. Kemi first, Kemi, you do your announcements first. And I apologize to the people who were waiting to speak. Hopefully it can happen next week. And maybe you could look and see the names of the two people who didn't get to speak and make sure they get to speak first next week. Thank you, Kenny. Go ahead, Kemi.
Okay. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here today. And there's some great resources in the chat box from all of our community members. So if you want to save that, you can click those 3 little dots. There's like a button at the bottom of that chat. And then if you click Save Chat, then it will save it as a file. So you can look back on that for resources. Okay, so a couple of upcoming announcements. There, for folks who identify as people of color, we have a weekly POC Sangha practice group. It's every Friday night. The next one is this Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. And it was, I don't know if anyone was here, was there Friday, but it was just like an incredible space. We had 35 folks. People were speaking their truth. We were singing together. We were crying and raging. And it's just such a powerful space to be in. So if you identify as POC, please come. And if you identify as white, we're really, really happy that Jocelyn, I think Jocelyn, you're actually here. Yeah, there she is. And another one of our teachers, Chris Peterson, are leading a Mindful of Whiteness anti-racist practice group or practice session on Sunday, June 7th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. So it's a chance for white folks to examine, reflect on your socialization as members of the dominant group and talk together about how you can help to undo these systems of oppression.
Thank you. Do you have more, Kemi?
Yes, one more, which is your birthday celebration.
Laser sharp brief.
Yes. So Trudy's 75th birthday celebration on Tuesday, June 9th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Hope to see everyone there. And I put the link to all 3 of these in the chat box.
Thank you, Akemi. Let's just sit for a minute now. So this is our tradition that at the end of a period of study and practice together, we appreciate the great blessing of having this kind of time together. And we express our gratitude for the privilege and the luxury of getting to do this, to study and practice, listen to teachings, listen to each other. We express our gratitude by sharing the blessings of our practice, by offering the goodness, whatever came out of this time that was beneficial for you, that you may have learned, that you're grateful for, just offering that to all beings everywhere without exception. You know, the Buddha stood up for equality and justice over and over again in his lifetime, and we can do this too. May we be a community of revolutionary kindness. May we sincerely greet each other as sisters and brothers with loving awareness and profound respect. And may this be how we change the world. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your presence here this morning. And I will see you next Sunday. Happy to see you then.
Thank
You
you,
can
Trudy.
unmute everybody so they can say
Thank you.
bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you, Trudy.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Trudy.
Namaste.
We got together.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Trudy.
Bye.
Hi, Abigail.
Hey, Carol.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, bye.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Jenny, where are you?
Hey,
Hi, Marilyn.
Hey, Martin.
Hi, Carol.
bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye, Melissa.
Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you. And thank you, Kenny and Akemi, too.
Yes, thank you both.
Hi, Michelle.
Bye. Love you.
You too.
Judy, I just feel it's